Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you're too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power.
Otep, this is Femi here with Freedom Now, and your ears are in tuned at high frequencies in a liberated zone. Freedom Now is a Pan-Africanist, global news outlet from coast to coast, dispelling the Western propaganda media and their all lies point of views. Freedom Now is devoted to relay true news, views, and proper clues to form solutions around freedom for the oppressed worldwide. Now, get relaxed, grab a pen, and phone a friend, because Freedom Now is set to begin to awaken deep sleepers dreaming about freedom now, within, in, freedom now, in.
The truth is, no one of us can be free until everybody is free. No one of us can be free until everybody is free.
Habari Gani. This is Sister Thage with Freedom Now's packed agenda for this Saturday, June 1st, 2024. Today we cover our communities locally, nationally, and internationally. We stand in solidarity with our oppressed sisters and brothers in Sudan, the Congo, Palestine, from across the Pacific, and more, and especially here in the U.S. settler colony, where we come to you from Los Angeles, here at KPFK Pacifica Radio, on the indigenous land of the Tongva Gabrielino peoples. First, we commence today's program with our brother Billion Godson with Africa Town Coalition and Blockchain 365, here to give us some Los Angeles community updates and what to look forward to this Juneteenth. Then, prolific author, radical historian, professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston, and Freedom Now co-producer, Dr. Gerald Horne interviews Joseph Kaplan, a graduate student at Rutgers University in New Jersey and author of the paper at the annual meeting of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, entitled We at War, the Bureau of Special Services and the Surveillance of New York's Black Left in the Era of the Urban Rebellions. And later in the hour, we cover both what is happening with our sisters and brothers in the Pacific South Seas, especially in Papua New Guinea and the Maori indigenous peoples of Aotearoa by the Western imperialist thieves, and the Maori resistance to even recently sending out a global petition for everybody around the world to sign, calling for the declaration of Maori political independence. And as solidarity around the world continues to organize via the power of the masses, the power of the people, we look at white supremacy and anti-Muslim bigotry and hate in India, as we're joined in conversation here on Freedom Now by our sister Safa Ahmed, the Associate Director of Media and Communications for the Indian American Muslim Council, here to help our Freedom Now listeners dissect Hindutva, or Hindu nationalism, the Nazi-inspired supremacist ideology that's tearing India apart, as today, Saturday, is the last day to vote for the Indian general elections, and the current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is known as the Trump of India. As this conversation addresses the Hindu caste system, a system that calls blacks the untouchables, the untouchable caste, calling our sisters and brothers subhumans, we do want to acknowledge that the indigenous term by the people themselves is Dalit. So when we hear the word Dalit, please know that if you equate Dalit with untouchables, the Dalit peoples reject being called untouchables. They are simply Dalit peoples, not the co-opted term of untouchables in their own Dravidian language dialects. Our music mix includes MLK, Zap Mama, Papu Habib, Maya Angelou, Griot B, Pharaoh Sanders, Resistance Oceana, Devaka, Madison Cali, Michael Jackson, Childish Gambino, and more. So sit back, phone a friend, and as always we stand ready for revolution.
till he's limp. Strange fruit hanging from the trees in the south. This is cookout. And the reason for the celebration is emancipation. Cause it took 5 months and 18 days for freedom to reach those Texan slaves. Tell me what you know about Juneteenth. Said it's time to celebrate Juneteenth. 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 Big Wiz auntie, they can't beat you. Domino again, Papa can't defeat you. What's in that cup, It ain't see-through 2 miles an hour, so everybody see you. We all having fun, cause on January 1, 1863, Lincoln said slavery was done in Confederacy, but the war wasn't really won, so we weren't free until the truth.
This is Sister Thage with Freedom Now, and we're joined back on the line by our brother Billion Godson with Africa Town Coalition and Blackshin 365. How are you doing this morning, brother Billion?
Hey, greetings. Good morning, Tej. I'm doing great. How you doing?
Just giving thanks for everything. And also to you too, especially, thank you for all that you do in the community for the people. And so as we've now entered June and Juneteenth is right around the corner, can you update our listeners with some of the stuff that's been going on in the Los Angeles community and some updates regarding Juneteenth?
Yes. So this month is Juneteenth. And as we do every year, we will have an event on Sunday, the 16th, June 16th, that will be community-based, community-driven, community-oriented to make sure we lift up the issues that are going on in the community, the many individuals and organizations that are working to help resolve our issues, and a opportunity for a lot of small businesses, that can afford some of the larger events to come out, set up, and make some of that seasonal income that people look forward to. This year we are excited because we will have both Dr. Cornel West and Dr. Melina Abdullah. They will come out and share the stage to speak to the community about their campaign for president and vice president of the U.S. Dr. Cornel West, he's been known for a long time to be a top intellectual in our community, a social justice advocate, and he threw his hat into the run for president this year. And it's most definitely a year that he is needed as a more sensible, just, and humane option when we have a former president who just recently got convicted and is now a felon, and we have a current president who is basically a war criminal. So, people across the country are saying we're no longer voting for a lesser two evils, but now we have a righteous option. So we are honored that they will be at our event on June 16th to speak to the community, but we are also encouraging people to register with the Justice for All Party. They need about 70,000 plus people to register so they can be on the ballot come November. So we most definitely have people out in the crowd at our event to register people. In addition, we're going to have members of the California Reparations Task Force and members of Californians Organizing for Reparations, which is the primary coalition stand on top of pushing reparations forward here in California. This past, I believe it was February or maybe early March, the California Legislative Black Caucus put forward, I believe it was 14 bills for reparations. Currently, we have 3 of them moving through the different legislative bodies. One of them being establishing a what's called a Freedmen Bureau that will basically help to oversee the reparations allotment to different people. There's another bill that is addressing properties that were taken through eminent domain to be returned to Black people, whether we're talking about the construction of the 10 freeway 105 freeway, and a number of other situations throughout the city and county where Black people lost a lot of property. But we will have them present to help share with the community about the status of that, but to also encourage people to get involved to help us drive this forward. And of course, as everyone knows, we have a housing crisis. LA, you could pretty much say, is the homeless capital of the nation, if not the world. So we are reaching out to a number of different organizations that have taken upon ourselves to help house people. Unfortunately, we hear billions of dollars have been going into supposedly housing people, but we've seen the issue get worse. Now we're seeing an increased effort to attempt to criminalize people for being homeless. So, we're working with people like LA Can, Stop LAPD Spying Coalition to push back against that. But again, we are knowing the need for immediate relief for people. So whether it's efforts like ours to actually raise funds to get hotel rooms, to get more resources for people that are on the streets, we're looking for other groups like that to come out and help make people more aware, because we know right now our organization gets hit daily with people who are being evicted. We are in the middle of an eviction crisis. They had announced last year there were about 50,000 people that are currently being evicted, and we know some of those people are fleeing the state. They said last year alone 56,000 people fled up out of LA County. The year before that, 86,000. The year before that, 100,000 people. And we know a great number of those people being people fleeing from Black communities that can no longer afford to be here. So, these are some of the things we want to make sure we don't get caught up in the corporate takeover of our holidays and events, that we make sure we stay grounded and provide these large gatherings like this with the information and resources that's needed. So when people leave, they don't just leave with fond memories, but potentially help to address the different needs they have.
Thank you so much, Brother Billion, for all your organizing work in the community. And if folks wanted to get involved, do you have some contact information, and let them know how they can join in?
So yes, people who want to get involved with us, they can find us on Instagram, YouTube as Africa Town Coalition. On Instagram, there is an underscore at the end of Africa Town Coalition. I myself can be found on pretty much all platforms, Billion Godson, Godsun. But again, Sunday, June 16th, come out, meet us in person, see how you can get involved, because right now we know a lot of people are silently dealing with this crisis, but we need people to know that this is not something to address individually. This is a systemic issue, so we need to organize and push back collectively. For people who are in a position to support and donate, you can hit our Cash App, which is $BLACTION. The number is 365. Again, that's $BLACTION 365.
And one last question for you, Brother Billion. Do you have any updates on the vendor permits that you had been working on and supporting the community with in Africa Town?
Yeah, so right now there's actually an improvement or some relief that has gone to the vendors. We were told that some of the fees they were having to pay have been significantly reduced. Some of the enforcement has eased up, and some of the access to different areas, such as areas like around some of the bigger stadiums, Dodger stadiums, Hollywood, the restrictions about setting up there have been eased up. So we're being told that people, can have access to those areas. But as always, we want people to know Africa Town has most definitely become one of the prime vending locations. Right now, we also have, I guess you can say, a safe space, a liberated zone for people to come out and conduct business.
And we thank you so much for all the organizing that you and our brothers and sisters with Africa Town Coalition and BLACTION 365 continue to do for the people. Thank you so much, Brother Billy, and we look forward to another update soon.
I thank you, Sister Tej, and the whole Freedom Now team for making sure we have freedom now. Ready for revolution.
Ready for revolution.
For Pacifica Radio, KPFK, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Joseph Kaplan, a graduate student at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and author of a recent paper at the annual meeting of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, the paper entitled We at War, the Bureau of Special Services and the Surveillance of New York's Black Left in the Era of the Urban Rebellions. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Joseph Kaplan.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here.
And we're pleased to have you. So why did you write this piece?
So this piece came about originally from attending a talk by Joanna Fernandez, a professor at Baruch College in New York. She actually sued the NYPD in 2014 to get the records of their clandestine intelligence service, the Bureau of Special Services, the so-called Red Squad of the NYPD, for her book on the Young Lords Party. She was unable to locate these records. However, the suit resulted in the discovery of these records in a basement in Queens. They've since been transferred to the Municipal Archives of New York, where they're now available to researchers, and I'm among the first set of researchers benefiting from this really pioneering work that Dr. Fernandez did to liberate these documents.
What is the size of this archive?
It's vast. There are hundreds of thousands of files available. Of course, we don't know how many have been deleted or otherwise disappeared by the NYPD. For instance, Dr. Fernandez was never able to fully recover the documents that she knows exist on the Young Lords Party. However, there's a substantial amount on various groups on the left, as well as more centrist organizations like the NAACP and others.
And the Young Lords Party, of course, was a kind of Latinx counterpart to the Black Panther Party. But that brings me back to your article, your paper, We at War. What is your argument in this paper?
Yeah, my argument is, so this specific paper is one chapter of my larger dissertation, which examines the trajectory of the NYPD's intelligence unit. It's actually founded in 1904, actually 4 years prior to the FBI, making it one of the most influential and oldest intelligence agencies in the United States. I track its history, starting from that 1904 period when it was founded as the Italian Squad, and trace this use of ethnicity and race as a marker of subversive threat through to the 1960s, culminating in 3 case studies where the Bureau of Special Services hired African-American police officers to infiltrate various Black radical groups, particularly in the context of the urban rebellions, which they considered part of a communist plot with Black radicals colluding with Third World revolutionaries to sow chaos and disorder in American cities. This chapter specifically looks at the Revolutionary Action Movement, which is one of the most extensive case files that we have in the Bureau of Special Services papers.
What about the Black Panther Party? Were they targeted?
Yes, absolutely. So I look at 3 case studies beginning with the Harlem Rebellion of 1964, their infiltration of a small Marxist group in Harlem. I then look at another small group that was infiltrated, and then I look at RAM. The Black Panther Party was directly targeted by the Bureau of Special Services and the FBI in a coordinated campaign that grew directly out of these prior campaigns. This culminated in the famous Panther 21 case, where 21 Black Panthers were indicted on arrested and charged with attempting to blow up the Bronx Botanical Gardens and other sites within New York. They were eventually acquitted on these charges. However, this was probably, like I said, the culmination of this longer process that I examined in my own work.
Now, in terms of the Panther 21, one of the defendants was Afeni Shakur, known to our audience as the mother of the late entertainer, rapper, activist Tupac Shakur. Are there any revelations coming out of these files about her and her activism?
Unfortunately, they're quite limited. These files, like I said, some of the more sensitive documents have clearly been purged. For instance, there's very little on the Panther 21. There's also very little on Malcolm X. These are things that certainly many historians would love to get their hands on, and I can only surmise that the NYPD is quite aware of that, and that's why they're not available in the public record.
Now, you suggested a moment or two ago that the thesis was that Black radicals in New York were in league with so-called Third World revolutionaries overseas. Who were the latter, supposedly?
Yeah, let me clarify the language there. This was the belief of the NYPD that there was some kind of collusion. Clearly, Black radicals had political commitments to the Third World. They had ideological connections and even personal connections. However, the NYPD's working thesis, which justified the repression that was visited on these Black radicals, was that communist states were directly funding these movements and directing them to foment these urban rebellions, which, of course, there's just no evidence of. And even FBI investigations themselves concluded that these rebellions were spontaneous. However, in looking at the Revolutionary Action Movement, specifically in this chapter, RAM, as it was known, specifically oriented themselves to what they called the Bandung world after the Bandung Conference of 1955, the Afro-Asian Solidarity Conference. Specifically, they looked to countries like Cuba as well as China and expressed solidarity with the Vietnamese liberation forces around the world.
Now, were there attempts by the Bureau of Special Services to break up or complicate marriages and or intimate partnerships of those who were surveilled?
That's a really good question. That's certainly something we see in political infiltration across the world. You see this in the UK, in a lot of the infiltration of the labor movement there. I don't have a lot of information specifically on breaking up marriages from what I've seen. However, certainly families were very much affected by this kind of repression. For instance, a raid that this culminates in. So RAM gets raided by the NYPD on June 21st, 1967. During the raid, they use various forms of subterfuge to gain access to people's houses. For instance, in one instance, claiming that someone's mother was in the hospital. So they open the door and then they're arrested. In other cases, entering into the homes, these private residences, and training guns on young children and traumatizing them for life. As far as targeting their relationships specifically, like the FBI may have done with the Klan and with other groups that were considered subversive, I don't have direct evidence of that. But
as an outgrowth of that previous question, what was the role of gender in terms of either the records you're looking at and or your study?
That's an excellent question because it's really central to a lot of what's happening, I believe. First of all, the Bureau of Special Services is specifically hiring men. It is specifically hiring Black men with military training to infiltrate these groups. Often these groups, whether it was RAM, whether it was the Progressive Labor Party in an earlier instance, didn't have necessarily a strong gendered analysis to their critique of capitalism, racism in the United States. And these Black men often portraying a sort of hyper macho affect would be able to gain entrance and often use their skills, their military skills, to curry favor within these groups and assume leadership positions. In addition to this, I think at a more fundamental level, RAM especially had a large contingent of women in it, something that's not necessarily recognized in the extant literature. But within New York specifically, there were a lot of women that were involved. And what ends up happening is these Black agents, these Black men that are sent to infiltrate these groups by their white superior officers, who are also men, end up surveilling these Black women in a way that has very clear voyeuristic elements to it. For instance, and maybe the most shocking examples or striking examples, the women in the arrest cards after these raids are described by their physical appearance, including assessments of their physical beauty. As in, the cards will literally read beautiful, nice looking. So it's very clear that you have that the surveillance of these radical groups is structured through a male gaze that is, both threatened by black radicalism, but at the same time has this very sinister sexual and gendered element to it.
Now, when I think of the Revolutionary Action Movement, I think of a man once known as Max Stanford. Is there anything about him, and who are some of the prominent women who were involved as well?
Yeah, so Stanford's actually headquartered in Philadelphia at this time, so he is arrested by the Philadelphia PD during this raid. The other people that are arrested, one of the way RAM operated in New York was based on a front group structure. So they had other groups, the most prominent one being the Jamaica Rifle and Pistol Club, based in Jamaica, Queens. One of the leaders, the secretary of this, was a woman named Mandela McPherson. She was a Department of Welfare worker in New York, and after the arrest, despite never actually being charged with anything, she was kicked out of her city job for 2 years and unable to provide for her family. There were other women like Ursula West, a Harlem school teacher, that was involved. And then also and I think this is actually very important too, on the question of gender, the defense campaign for the 17 accused, as the people arrested were called, was led by a coalition headed by radical black women in the city, including Black Women Enraged, a Harlem-based group, and Herman Ferguson, who was sort of head of RAM in New York. His future wife, Ialua Ferguson, who was the head of the New York Black Teachers Association, headed the legal defense for Ferguson.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, Herman Ferguson wound up in Guyana, the country on the northern coast of South America. Is there anything about him there in those files?
So the files, that's a very good question. The files cut off when he goes into exile. They don't follow him and track him into another country. There is some evidence that I've found from CIA files that this kind of international surveillance was taking place. The Bureau of Special Services itself definitely played a subordinate role in that, providing information to the CIA. It's unclear how privy they were to any information coming from the CIA. However, it's probably a matter of pretty safe speculation that they were in communication.
Now, what about either prosecutions of the wrongdoers in the Bureau of Special Services and or civil judgments, cash judgments as a result of lawsuits?
Yeah, so this all culminates actually in 1971. There is a lawsuit led by Barbara Hanshu, a lawyer in the city, on behalf of several different defendants. None of them are actually in the RAM case, but some are in the Black Panthers, other in the gay liberation movement, various left-wing movements of the 70s. That does result in a consent decree against NYPD spying in 1985. As far as legal judgments against the NYPD, those are not forthcoming, as is unfortunate, but perhaps expected. There are cash settlements for some people. Ferguson, I believe, gets a cash settlement when he comes back to the United States in 1989 and sues for the release of his files under COINTELPRO.
Mm-hmm. Now, does this kind of surveillance continue to exist, at least in New York City?
Absolutely. And in fact, the Hanshu case itself has undergone a number of revisions, right? So in 1985, the consent decree is finally granted against NYPD spying. It requires an articulable reason for infiltrating a political group. However, in 2003, in the wake of the Patriot Act, in the wake of 9/11, these protections are slowly rolled back. In 2007, the protections for an aggrieved class, the standard is raised for someone to file suit under the provisions of Hanshu, and essentially now they're relatively defunct. However, there's been some legislative action to prevent NYPD spying that's had a little bit more traction.
So what do we have to look forward to in terms of your work, Mr. Kaplan?
Well, so I'm currently turning this into a dissertation that's supposed to be finished by the end of this year. That'll be then turned into a book manuscript in the hopes of writing really the first critical history of the Bureau of Special Services. There's been obviously a lot of memoirs from the former agents that are essentially hagiographies. They're quite celebratory of the unit, but anyone that was part of the movement in New York in the 1960s, 1970s is well aware of the nefarious actions of BOSS, as its Orwellian acronym would have it. And I think this is my contribution to trying to provide a critical alternative lens to, like I said, the celebratory history of what was a fundamentally repressive intelligence unit.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Joseph Kaplan, graduate student at Rutgers University in New Jersey, author of a recent paper at the convention of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History entitled We at War, the Bureau of Special Services and the Surveillance of New York's Black Left and the Era of the Urban Rebellions. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.
Ditto.
This is Sister Flora, and you are listening to Freedom Now at KPFK 90.7 FM in occupied Mexico, including Los Angeles, 98.7 FM Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM in San Diego, and streaming live on the web at kpfk.org. Today's program, as well as 10 prior editions, can be reheard at kpfk.org/audio archive, and scroll down to Freedom Now. From 12 to 1 p.m., following Freedom Now is our sister Assumpta, with Spotlight Africa addressing issues facing Mother Africa. For a truly alternative international perspective on world affairs, check out RTTV Russia, CCTV China, and online at Presna, Latina Cuba Telesur Venezuela, News 24, South Africa, and Press TV Iran.
I'm still fighting. I'm still fighting in my mountains, in my jungle, in my villages, in the prisons. I'm still fighting.
From the river to the sea, free, free Palestine. The Palestine will be happy free. I love you.
And now we turn to the fight of our indigenous sisters and brothers resisting the thieves of Western imperialism in the Pacific South Seas. That mighty chant you just heard was the granddaughter of one of Papua New Guinea's independence leaders, the late Mbaki Okuk. We do want to honor the over 2,000 Papua New Guinea family who were recently killed in the massive landslides this week. Please note that this occurred in the Enge province, where the indigenous villagers are deemed by the West to be some of the poorest in the Asia-Pacific region. Yet, all their resources are being stolen. As in Enge province, that's where Porgera gold mine is, which is just reopened in December 2023, 7 months ago. Papua New Guinea is one of the world's top producing gold mines, and one of the companies invested in this mine specifically is Barrick Gold, based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, who sits silent in the face of this devastation in true Western imperialism thievery fashion. Shame. We stand in solidarity with our Maori family in Aotearoa. Some may know it by its colonized name, New Zealand, but for our purposes today and always, we call it Aotearoa. Our Maori sisters and brothers just had a major budget day protest where they also were waving Palestinian flags in solidarity, as the word Maori was completely left out of the budget. We will hear from Te Pati Maori political party co-leader, MP Debbie Ngarawe Packer. She's a fierce warrior revolutionary in the parliament who's been leading the fight against the fast-track bill to put all environmental protection regulations into the hands of just 3 appointed Euro-descendant politicians. And now the Te Pati Maori Party is protesting the new budget proposal in the parliament, fighting for inclusion as the indigenous peoples of the land.
But outside Parliament and around the country over the day, it has been thousands of Maori have been marching in protest up in Auckland and Rotorua, everywhere, and in Wellington. And leading that protest, or alongside that protest, is Te Pati Maori, and Te Pati Maori co-leader Debbie Ngarawe Packer is supporting the day of action. She's joining me now from the forecourt of Parliament. Tēnā koe. Debbie, thanks for your time.
Kia ora, Simon. Thank you.
I'd just like to ask you, is there anything in this budget that you like?
No.
That's a short answer. Have you been through all the detail? There's nothing there?
Look, between hosting tens of thousands of people across the motu, we've been fed constructively what's going on. I guess, when we've got a budget that seems to be remiss of having the word Māori in any of it. We've got a health budget which doesn't have Māori in it. We've got a budget with whānau ora that hasn't increased. We've got matatini that's in fact been cut. So it just seems to be a budget for the privilege and a budget that denies that tangata whenua even exists in Aotearoa.
I guess the government's argument here is that tax cuts can help everybody, including Māori.
I think, what we are seeing is a government that's in denial of actual models and frameworks that have worked. And again, we look at the social return on investment model, for example, for whānau ora, and we look at the way that we've seen a success of 7AA. So when you've got a government that's dismantling things that had targeted investment, it's pretty hard to see how they're thinking their budget is going to work for Māori when they've dismantled every framework that was addressing Māori needs. So, no, I think that's a cop-out. It is a budget for the privilege. We knew what we were coming into, and there's no surprises. We're not happy with it at all. And in fact, tens of thousands of people around Aotearoa felt the same.
Yeah, so we saw that the day of action today. I guess is it a philosophical difference? I mean, they don't believe in targeted support, they believe in universality there. So philosophically, you're never going to agree.
I think philosophically, how they think the best buck for their money is easily, and to be honest, Labour weren't that much different. But when you have success models, and when you have models that are addressing the fact that, 20% of the population, we now make up nearly 1 million of the population, that should at least reflect that 20% of the population addressing that, and there simply isn't. But it's not just Māori, it's all marginalised communities. We've seen the cuts for disability, the way that they're treating rainbow communities, the way that they're treating our climate, the environment. So, again, it is, and this is a government for the gentry. We've known when they arrived that this was a government for the gentry, and they continue to look after the gentry. This isn't the first time in Aotearoa, and we'll survive this and more.
Okay, Debbie Ngaruapaka, thank you so much for your time from the forecourt of Parliament there.
And now we go to the Budget Day protest with feedback from our sisters and brothers in the Maori community.
Thousands of people took to the streets today in a show of opposition to the government policy impacts on Māori.
The nationwide hikoi ended with the bombshell announcement from Te Pati Māori that it would establish its own parliament. Alice Wilkins reports.
Protesters carried banners and flags through central Rotorua this morning, but their voices carried across the country.
Everything that the government is doing is against Māori, and we are not standing for it, so that's why we are here today.
We're here for our culture, for our people, for our generations to come. A call that was being echoed.
Government can't continue to treat us like second-class citizens in our own country anymore, and this shows it. This is only Rotorua, so I don't know what's happening across the country.
In Auckland, police and protesters started to gather from early in the morning.
Maori ora.
Readying their vehicles and fixing their flags to drive into the city centre together en masse.
We are a bunch of teachers who have come this morning to support the kaupapa.
This government is taking away our mana motuhake.
We just want to be us, tūturu, whenua, we belong here.
And there were plenty of supporters waiting for them along the way. Coming together to rally at Auckland's Aotea Square. But they were far from finished. What started in cars out on the road this morning has continued on foot as thousands take this hikoi to Queen Street.
Protesting against how this government has totally failed. Totally failed, not just Māori, but anyone struggling, anyone down at the bottom.
Very emotional, really. It is.
It's a proud moment for us, for Te Iwi Māori. There was also a show of numbers in Wellington as the crowd made its way to the Parliament grounds, greeted by Te Pati Māori, who had a new call to action to share.
We are in activation mode. Today, the revolution starts! It is time for our own
Rawiri Waititi indicating Māori would start their own separate parliament from the steps outside the beehive, saying all Māori would be listened to with the focus on mokopuna livelihood and decision. A rallying cry after a day of mobilisation across the country. Alice Wilkins, News Hub.
And we want to invite our Freedom Now listeners to take action. You can join in a worldwide effort to sign the petition for the declaration of the Maori political independence. Everyone can sign, no matter what age, ethnicity, or culture you identify as. The petition can be found on the Maori Party website. The address is spelled maoriparty.org.nz/campaigning. Again, that's maoriparty.org.nz/campaigning. And it's the second petition listed. Please go ahead and fill out your information and join the movement to support our sisters and brothers in their declaration of a Maori political independence. And now we go to our final interview for this Freedom Now Hour. This is Sister Thage with Freedom Now, and we're so honored to be joined by our sister, Safa Ahmed. She's the Associate Director of Media and Communications of the Indian American Muslim Council, America's oldest and largest Indian Muslim diaspora organization. Our sister Safa joins us today on Freedom Now to help us in dissecting Hindutva, also known as Hindu nationalism, which is the Nazi-inspired supremacist ideology that's tearing India apart and its ties to the skyrocketing anti-Muslim hate. Welcome to Freedom Now, Sister Safa.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're so honored to be joined by you today. And so first, can you give our listeners a brief overview of your organization?
Sure. So the Indian American Muslim Council, or IAMC, is a group that's been around for over 20 years now. We were actually established in 2002 in the wake of a horrific anti-Muslim pogrom known as the Gujarat pogrom, in which over 1,000, close to 2,000 Muslim women, children, and men were horrifically slaughtered by Hindu militant groups that had some ties and some backing by the government at the time, which leaned toward this ideology called Hindu supremacism, or Hindutva, as you mentioned. And from there, sitting in the US, a group of Indian American Muslims looked at what was unfolding and realized that this is not only a horrific tragedy in the sense that there was so much bloodshed, but also in the sense that there was a shift in the way Muslims were being seen in India, no longer as, your neighbors or just friends or co-workers, but as an enemy to be eliminated in the most horrific way possible. And that's why IAMC was established, in order to be that voice for Indian American Muslims, but also to raise awareness about Hindutva in India and the United States.
Right on. And so just as a reminder for our listeners, Hindu nationalism is centered around a caste system. Did you want to make a quick statement about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hindutva is often translated as Hindu nationalism or Hindu supremacy, but there's actually layers to the different types of hate that it breeds. So on the more explicit side, you have their anti-Muslim hatred. Hindu supremacists believe that Muslims and also Christians are infiltrators in India, that they do not belong there, that they are the descendants of murderers and invaders, etc. And as such, they need to be violently exterminated or driven out of India and into Pakistan or Bangladesh. But there's also levels to Hindutva that are very much centered on the Brahmin caste understanding of the world and understanding of Hinduism, because as many listeners might know already, Hinduism is not a monolith. Just like with any other world religion, there are so many different ways to practice Hinduism. However, Hindutva upholds this very specific form of Hinduism that puts the Brahmin caste, or the quote-unquote most upper caste, on top, and all other caste, as they define them, are beneath them in some way. And that's why Hindutva violence also impacts Dalit people, especially Dalit women in India. So it's a very, not just Islamophobic movement, an anti-Muslim movement, anti-Christian, but also anti-Dalit and anti-woman movement.
Thank you. In our next question, can you share with our listeners, from a historical perspective, the implications for India's general elections, particularly for Prime Minister, as Narendra Modi is up for re-election, and what this indicates for our Muslim family given the historical atrocities?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, IMC was founded after the 2002 Gujarat pogrom. Now, the person who was the chief minister of the state of Gujarat at the time when the pogrom was happening was none other than Narendra Modi, who is the Prime Minister of India today. So he's an interesting individual on many levels, and I say interesting very lightly. But this man was actually a part of a Hindu supremacist militant group from a very young age. So at the age of 8, Narendra Modi joined the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is India's oldest and largest Hindu paramilitary group. They actually serve as a sort of fountainhead for Hindutva in India. And as a side note, Hindutva was modeled off fascist movements that were very popular during World War II in Europe. So think Nazism, think the fascism of Mussolini. All of these ideologies were things that the RSS's founding members truly looked up to. And so you can imagine how a person who's been in that type of environment from the age of 8 turns out to be. The RSS was very much an anti-Muslim organization from its inception. And so for Modi coming into power as chief minister and using and abusing that power to allow Hindu militant groups to slaughter Muslims en masse, that was like that was not just horrific in the sense that it was a massive loss of life, but also horrific in the sense that Hindutva was given political legitimacy. And the militant groups that were allowed to carry out that bloodshed were also given some backing by the government. So at the time, Modi had these meetings with law enforcement where he said, allow Hindus to vent their anger against Muslims, which is what we saw unfolding in the 2002 Gujarat pogroms. And so fast forward a few months after the pogrom concluded, after the blood was all dried up, and you see that there's, like I mentioned, there's a sort of shift in how Muslims were perceived in India, and especially in Gujarat. Modi actually used the Gujarat pogrom as a way to further his own political career, because Hindu supremacists in the country looked to Modi and saw that he was willing to be soft with them when it came to anti-minority violence. And this led to him becoming prime minister in 2014. So Modi essentially rode his new wave of popularity after this horrific massacre, came to the position of prime minister, and then continued to abuse that power and abuse his ideology, implanting it into the mainstream in India. So when we talk about implications for this upcoming election, there's a lot that Modi has done to make Hindutva from a fringe movement into something that has infiltrated at every single level of Indian democracy. I'm talking about the judiciary is very quick to put Muslims in jail for the most bare minimum offenses. Not only that, but they're willing to crack down on Muslims, on journalists, on activists for criticizing the government and throw them in jail under anti-terrorism laws that are often abused to convict those who are most vulnerable in society. I'm talking about the government officials themselves at every single rank of government. People in Modi's party are known for spreading hate speech and violently inciting hatred against minority groups. There's a very specific example from February in 2020 where one of Modi's party members was addressing a crowd at a rally, and he was talking about Muslims, and he said, "Shoot the traitors to the nation." And soon after that, in February of 2020, what we call the Delhi pogrom broke out, in which dozens of Muslims were killed at the hands of Hindu lynch mobs. So we've talked about the judiciary, we've talked about like it being in the government, but then there's also at the social level, what has been made acceptable has become this genocidal climate of anti-Muslim sentiment. So if you look at the mainstream media, Modi has normalized this almost lapdog type of behavior from the media where anything that he puts out as narrative is gospel to them. Anything else that gets put out is quickly deemed to be fake news, very much a la Trump. In fact, the Editors Guild of India has actually compared Indian media today, like the mainstream media, it's been compared to Radio Rwanda prior to the Rwandan genocide because of the sheer amount of anti-Muslim hatred and disinformation that's allowed to spread. I mean, you have news anchors who go on air and make jokes about Muslim men being flogged in public by police. And this is just scratching the surface. I mean, I could talk about how mob violence has skyrocketed in India. I'm talking specifically about Hindu militant mob violence because of this climate of acceptability where Modi has made it okay to spew hatred against Muslims. Of course, there are groups in society that begin acting on this. So you have a rise in mob lynchings in which Muslim men are largely targeted and attacked, sometimes filmed as they're being murdered or tortured in public. For very small offenses like perhaps stealing, sometimes or many times it's under accusations of possession of beef, of transporting cattle, very small things like these. There's frequent attacks on Muslim neighborhoods, on mosques. There's laws poised to strip citizenship from millions that Modi has placed in position. So the Citizenship Amendment Act is one of them. For those unfamiliar, this is an anti-Muslim, explicitly anti-Muslim citizenship law that gives the government the ability to strip citizenship from millions of Indian Muslims. There are detention camps for the undocumented who are affected by these types of citizenship laws. There's punitive demolitions of homes and mosques. If a Muslim protests, if a Muslim fights back against a Hindu mob, their home could very easily be demolished. They could lose their mosque. There's shrine demolitions that have become very, very common. There are laws that criminalize interfaith marriages and conversions away from Hinduism to faiths like Islam and Christianity. There's retaliation for religious expression, like wearing the hijab and praying outdoors. And what's most alarming out of all of this is that this is only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, Modi has been in power for about 10 years, but to think of all that he's accomplished, all the things that I just read off to you, yes, it's been going on since 2014. So this has been actually going on since 2019, when Modi not only passed the Citizenship Amendment Act, but also stripped special status away from Kashmir, which is a region that is Muslim majority, that specifically India has control over. So this led to an increase in crackdown, military style, on Kashmiri Muslim, predominantly Muslim civilians. To see all this ramping up so aggressively since 2019, the home demolitions, the bans on wearing hijabs in schools, all this has been happening in only the last few years. And to see that elections are upcoming, to see that Modi has only continued, and his entire party, to be honest, to see that they've only continued with their rhetoric, with allowing for explicit calls for genocide of Muslims to go unpunished, calls for mosques to be demolished en masse. All of this will continue if he becomes prime minister, and it will absolutely lead to even more dangerous violence against Muslims.
We just wanted to remind our listening audience that we are joined by our sister, Safa Ahmed. She's the Associate Director of Media and Communications for the Indian American Muslim Council. So we also wanted to ask you, in relation to Western powers and this anti-Muslim hatred and the acts that are going on today, what is your message to students on campuses protesting against the genocide in Gaza?
First of all, full power to our students for their bravery, for their immense courage to stand up and speak truth to power in the face of a genocide and a government that explicitly supports that genocide. I want to say, as someone who is not a student, but someone who has been fighting this fight for Palestine for a very long time, that I and so many others are so incredibly proud of you. And I hope that this fight, this commitment to justice and this commitment against fascism will continue for all threads of fascism that find themselves present in this country, that we will be able to use Palestine as the starting point for the liberation of all those who are oppressed. And the strengthening of our communities, both here and internationally. Together, I hope that, we can create a better world. It's been very, very bleak these past few months, but this is the first time I think a lot of us are feeling hopeful, and it's thanks to these students.
Right on. I wanted to ask if you wanted to add anything else as well, share with our listeners any contact information, if folks wanted to learn more about the Indian American Muslim Council, the actions that you're taking, how do people become involved and stay on the radar?
Sure. So first of all, I'd like you all to drop us a follow on social media. You can find us at IAM Council on Twitter and I believe Instagram as well. And you can also check out our website. It is imc.com. You can read up on all our resources that we have on there. You can also check out one of IMC's very important coalition projects, which is SAVERA. That is SAVERA. This project is a coalition project between us and several other human rights groups based in the United States, where we work on tackling all forms of supremacy and hate in this country, but especially focused on talking about Hindutva in the United States. So we encourage you to check out those resources as well, get informed, and also to get involved by reaching out to us on social media and also share our content. Education here is key because not a lot of people know about Hindutva. Not a lot of people know that it's connected or has parallels with white supremacy and Zionism. I mean, all three of these movements are very much linked. And so the key to dismantling all of them, as they deserve to be, is to know all of them and to know all their links with each other. So learn about Hindutva, learn about how it props up white supremacist actors and far-right Islamophobes, and learn about how it props up far-right speakers, Islamophobes, folks against affirmative action, against academic freedom, and all these other different interconnected causes. In order to create a more just world, it needs to begin with learning about the forces that are trying to dismantle that just world.
What are some of the challenges that you're facing right now that you want our listeners to know about so we can reach out and support you?
Absolutely. So the main thing that we are facing as a challenge is just lack of education in general. And that's just like a very broad thing that we are trying to get everyone to kind of tune into the fight against Hindutva, to learn about what's going on, what it means, how it impacts people right here, right now in this country. And like I said, you can do that just by visiting us on social media, sharing our posts, sharing our informational slides and resources and reports. We've got all of it on our websites, both IMC's and SAVERA's, and our partner organizations like Hindus for Human Rights, India Civil Watch International. All of these groups have done incredible work, and they put in so much time and effort into working to explain Hindutva to an American audience that is interested in combating fascism in all its forms and flavors. So please do give those a look and spread them. That is the best way you can get involved. That is the best way you can help us out.
Thank you so much, my sister. We want to thank you, our sister Safa Ahmed, Associate Director of Media and Communications with the Indian American Muslim Council. Thank you so much for joining us on Freedom Now.
Thank you so much for having me.
And in closing, we'd like to thank our guests. Thank you, Safa Ahmed. Thank you, Brother Billion. Thank you, Joseph Kaplan. Thank you, Addie. Thank you to our co-producers, Dr. Gerald Horne, Sister Flora, Sister Femi, Brother Brandon. Thank you to our board op Wendell and all those who made today's program possible. Please stay tuned for our sister Assumpta coming up next with Spotlight Africa, addressing issues facing Mother Africa. Please make a note that we will be in Fund Drive on our next Saturday program, so please be ready to call in and support Freedom Now. Signing off, this is Sister Thage. Until next week, as always, we stand ready for revolution.